Rosh Chodesh Elul. We're entering the month of Elul, the month of preparation for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim, for the Aseres Yemei Tshuva. And there is a custom. It's a custom that has its foundation in the Pirkei of Rabbi Lezer, to blow the shofar every morning during the month of Elul. And the Pirkei of Rabbi Lezer says that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up according to some sheets a day earlier, but he went up the first day of Elul to Har Sinai to receive the second luchos, and the Jewish people blew, and there are two girsas, two texts in the Pirkei of Rabbi Lezer. They blew on that day a shofar to prevent the Jewish people from committing the blunder that they made the first time that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, and to ensure that they will not build a golden calf or another form of avodah zarah again. Now, we have to understand, now according to one text, they blew the shofar the day Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai. I assume that means after Moshe left the Machana. And according to the other Gersa, the other text, they blew it every morning during that 40-day period that Moshe Rabbeinu was on top of the mountain. And it was on Rosh Chodesh Elul, or the 30th of Av, that Moshe Rabbeinu ascended the mountain. And so they blew the shofar every morning up till Yom Kippurim, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down with the luchos. And corresponding with what they did, the custom mentioned in the Pirkei of Rabbi Lezer, the Pirkei of Rabbi Lezer even uses the lashon that the Chachamim instituted, but sometimes they use that expression in regard to minhagim, in regard to customs also. They instituted the custom of blowing the shofar during the month of Elul, in a sense that we should not commit the same blunder that the Jews at that time. Now, that has to be understood. What does it mean that we shouldn't commit the same blunder? I mean, what was the purpose in the future generations? That generation we understand. No one is going to build a golden calf today. But sometimes the averos that we do, when we deviate from the path of Torah, while it's not exactly the same sins, the same averos, violations of the same prohibition, not fulfilling the mitzvos that perhaps that was done at that time, but sometimes there is an underlying principle to all these cases. Now, and we have to understand, so it's important for us to understand how the blowing of the shofar prevented the Jewish people of that time not to make another golden calf, in order to understand its significance for us. Now, it's also interesting, there is a machlokas. Both Lashonos are brought down in the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. Our custom is that we blow the shofar every morning in davening. Some blow it before L'David Hashem Ori, and some blow it after L'David Hashem Ori. But it's always blown at the end of the tefillah, at the end of davening, just as the people are ready to leave the shul. But there is a shita brought down, and it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. Apparently, it was a pretty strong minhag at one time to blow the shofar not just in the morning by Shacharis, but in the evening by Ma'ariv. When people left the shul, they would also blow the shofar. And this is somewhat difficult because if shofar and Rosh Hashanah, okay, Rosh Hashanah, it's a halacha, it's a mitzvah, but we only blow it in the day. Why all of a sudden here do we blow the shofar in the day and in the night? According to some opinions, of course, that's not our practice. So why is it that way? Now, I have discussed I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the question is about the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av. We have special Haftorahs, and the 7 weeks are identified as the Shiva de Nechemta, the 7 weeks of consolation. And I've raised the question, and I mentioned that I will suggest different answers as the weeks go by. It seems strange that when it comes to Piranios, when it comes to tragedy, to remembering tragedy, or more than that, to re-experience tragedy, so we have 3 weeks between Shavas B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. But when it comes to the Shiva de Nechemta, to the days of consolation, to the weeks of consolation, so it's not just 7, it's not 3 weeks, but it's 7 weeks. Why is it that we need these extra weeks? Extra weeks for special Haftorahs of consolation. And I mentioned at the time that just as the 3 weeks connect Shavas B'Tammuz with Tisha B'Av, the 7 weeks connect Tisha B'Av with Rosh Hashanah, with the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of Tshuva. And I suggested that, a matter of fact, all these 10 weeks are preparation for the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. We have to realize our situation. We have to realize what brought about that situation. And the Shiva de Nechemta come and say, but you could fix it. There is hope. Don't give up hope. Yes, you distanced yourself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God, from the Torah. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to come close. He wants to restore that relationship. And that prepares us for the Aseret Yemei Tshuva. But I want to suggest, I'm going to suggest another possible explanation, and there are other explanations as well, why there are 7 weeks of special Haftorahs. And it's interesting, I mentioned this week is the week of Rosh Chodesh Elul, and it's interesting that, and Rosh Chodesh Elul always falls out. When I say Rosh Chodesh Elul, there are 2 days Rosh Chodesh Elul. The second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is the first day of the month of Elul, always falls out in the week of the Parsha Shoftim, and the Haftorah of Parsha Shoftim is Anochi Hu Menachemchem. It is I God, who is Menachem you. So apparently, I want to suggest what the possible relationship is between the Haftorah of Parsha Shoftim and the fact that Chodesh Elul always begins in the week of Parsha Shoftim. It's true. The first day Rosh Chodesh Elul sometimes, not this year, is in Parshas Re'eh. But the first day Rosh Chodesh Elul is not part of the month of Elul. The month of Elul in itself only begins with the second day Rosh Chodesh. Anyway, so now I mentioned in the past a certain thought that is brought down in the name of the Psikta, and it's brought down in different forms and shapes in the Alkut Shimoni, and it's brought down in the Avudram. Everybody quotes the Avudram as being the one who mentions this medrash, but in the form that it's mentioned in the name of the Psikta, the medrash says that the medrash takes the 7 parshios of Nechama, the 7 Haftorahs of Nechama, and takes the first pasuk of each of these Haftorahs and weaves them together. In other words, besides the message that each Haftorah that we say on each Shabbos of the 7 weeks, the message of consolation, there is a joint message that begins with the first week, Nachmu Achmami, but that joint message comes not from joining all the Haftorahs together, but joining the first pasuk in each of the Haftorahs together. And the way the Psikta says it, which is somewhat different from the way the Avudram, the Medrash the Avudram mentions, and the Alkut Shimoni, the Parshas Veschanan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to Abram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Moshe. And we could suggest that Abram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, they represent the Masorah of our parents and of our teachers. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, Nachmu Ami, go and console my nation. The Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. The Jewish people are in Golus. The Jewish people are in a state of mourning. And mourning requires nechama, requires consolation. So Nachmu Ami, go console my people. And in a sense, it says, let them feel connected to me. But then the Jewish people, when Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe come to the Klal Yisrael, to the Jewish people, figuratively, but the first pasuk of the next Haftorah, Vatomer Tzion Azavani Hashem V'Hashem Shechachani. Zion rejects the consolation. The Jewish people say, God forgot me. God left me. And then the third week, that was last week by Parshas Re'eh, the Navi comes back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he says, Ani Yisrael lo Nuchama. afflicted and storm-tossed, unconsoled one. They remain unconsoled. Now, why is it important for the Navi, for the Avos, if the Avos, the patriarchs and Moshe Rabbeinu, they represent the parents, they represent the teachers. We also have to understand that. Why? Why do they have to come back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu what Klal Yisrael said? And then this coming week, God says, Anochi, Anochi hu nachemchem. It is I, God, I, God, who is menachem you, who is consoling you. And then, according to the Medrash, God continues. So the first three Haftorahs, in a sense, from the perspective of the joint message, is really not a consolation. It's the Jewish people rejecting the consolation, whether it's the consolation of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, as the Psikta says, or it's the consolation of the Nevi'im, of the prophets, as the Yalkut Shimoni says, as the Avudram says. But whatever the case, in the first three Haftorahs, the consolation that is offered is rejected by the Jewish people. The Jewish people say, God has forgotten me. And then, so Anochi, Anochi, Menachemchem, it's not them. It's me that's consoling you, God says. And then, Kumiyori, arise, shine, for your light has arrived, and the glory of Hashem shined upon you. God continues, consoling the Jewish, actually that's the, and Rani Akara Lo Yolada, you break out in song. God tells the Jewish people, break out in song, you can be happy. And your light shines, the glory of God is upon you. That's part of the consolation that God, the three Haftorahs of consolation that God gives the Jewish people. And then on the last week, so Sosus Bashem, I will rejoice intensely with God. Togel nafshi, my soul shall exalt with my God, for he has dressed me in a raiment of salvation, in a robe of righteousness. He has cloaked me like a bridegroom who dons priestly glory, and like a bride who bedecks herself in her jewelry. So this is the Jewish people responding, accepting the consolation. So it's very interesting. We could suggest there are really only three Haftorahs of consolation. The last Haftorah, and it might be dependent upon a machlokas between the Rav HaChovel, Tosfos, the end of Megillah, and Rabbeinu Tam. The Rav HaChovel is assumed to be, many say, Rabbeinu Ephraim, who was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam. I've seen others suggest it was Rabbeinu Meshulam. Okay, but the general perspective is that's Rabbeinu Ephraim, who was a Talmud of Rabbeinu Tam. And because Rabbeinu Ephraim says there are some times that this Haftorah is said at a later date. But in any case, so we have three Haftorahs of consolation, and then we have a fourth Haftorah where, in a sense, the Jewish people thank God or accept his consolation. So really, it's all equal. But we have to understand, why does God play this game, so to say, seemingly, Chas Shalom, this is playing the game, but why does God seemingly play this game according to the Medrash? First he goes and he says to Moshe, Aaron, to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, or the Nevi'im, and he tells them, go console my people. And then the Jewish people reject it. And then they go back to God and they say the Jewish people rejected the consolation. What is and then the Jewish people reject the consolation. Then God comes and says, Anochi, this week's Haftorah, I, God, am consoling you. It's not Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe. It's me who's consoling you now. Why play this game? Why don't we have the first Haftorah? Anochi, Menachemchem. Why do we need a situation that the consolation should be given over in a manner that the Jewish people don't accept it? That they think that God is cut off from them? What is going on here? How are we to understand? How are we to understand this? But I always mention the matter of fact, I mentioned that in the Az Yashir, at the end, we make reference at the end of the Az Yashir to the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And so why Dafka here, in regard to the Az Yashir, do we make reference to it? And it's interesting that when Yaakov was forced to leave his father's house, his father's tent, he said, God will, and he comes to Beis Kel, and there he has this dream of Sulam Mutzavarza, Rosh Magia Shemaima. And the God appears to him, and God tells him, "I'll be with you." So so Yaakov says, "If God will be with me, and He will watch over me on this place." And this is Hara Maria. This is the Makom HaMikdash. That will be the Makom HaMikdash. Ushmarani b'derech asher anochi oleich, and he'll watch over me. V'nasan li lechem lechol, and he'll give me bread to eat, to beg it bosh, and clothes to wear. V'shavti b'shalom beisavi, I'll return to my father's house. V'haya Hashem li le'elikim. God will be for me a God. Seems that Yaakov Avinu, Bechira Avos, the chosen one of the patriarchs, making a deal with God. He says, once again, I just wanted to shut off the phone. He's making a deal with God. God, if you'll be good to me, you'll give me clothes, you'll give me food, you'll return me to my father's house. Okay, then, B'hai Hashem li'elakim, you'll be my God. Implication, chas v'shalom, that Yaakov Avinu is saying, but if not, forget it, it's over. How are we to understand that? Well, Ya'al Adas, such a thing. But I mention always that you take a look at the three Svarim that was written by Shlomo Melech, Mishlei, Keheles, and Shir Hashirim. In Keheles, going a little backwards, but Keheles, Shlomo identifies himself as Keheles ben David. In Mishlei, he identifies himself as Mishlei ben David. In Keheles, he identifies himself as Keheles, the son of David. In Mishlei, he is the Mishlei, the son of David. In Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo. He doesn't mention David. He doesn't mention his father. It's just him. Shir Hashirim Asher L'Shlomo. Why? Rashi asked that question, but I want to suggest an answer. Mishlei, Divrei Mishlei ben David, Rashi explains what's Divrei Mishlei ben David. Divrei Mishlei. Tochacha Musar, chastising, giving direction. That's something that's given over from father to son, from teacher to student. Shma b'ni Musar Avicha. Ethics, Pirkei Avos, is called the ethics of the fathers. In fact, the Masorah is listed over there also. So the that's something that's based on the relationship between child and parent, between teacher and student. Gehelis, Sof Dover. What is the sum total of everything? Gehelis, Sof Dover, Hakol Nishma, Esalikim Yirei, fear of God. Yaakov Avinu, when he refers to God, he says, Pachad Abi Yitzchak, the God who my father Yitzchak feared. Fear of God is given over from parent to child, from teacher to student. But Shir Hashirim is the love relationship. A love relationship in its main part has to become a personal relationship. There it's just Shlomo and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's just Shlomo and HaKadosh Baruch Hu that have that relationship. That Shir Hashirim, that the relationship that Shir Hashirim discusses. It's the love relationship between the Jewish people and God. That's a personal relationship. And it's the love relationship. We have a double relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The tefillas every time. We say, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosseinu. We have a relationship with God based on the perception of God in our own lives. And we have a relationship with God based on the perception of God in the life of our ancestors. And the interesting thing is that we see it today. When I was a boy, came Yisker, whatever it is, you saw a lot of people coming to shul. Why? In a sense, they had a certain relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yisker was very important. Halachically, Yisker is not so important in most cases. But it was very important because it represented their a certain relationship that they had with God, the God of their ancestors. It's interesting. Many of them would come to the shul where their parents used to daven. They wanted to identify with the relationship their parents had. But they didn't have a personal relationship. And I want to suggest that even many of those that were observant, primarily the nature of the observance was not one of a personal relationship. It was a continuation, a perpetuation of the relationship that existed with their parent and their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They continued the tradition. And I'm talking about people who are observant. I'm not saying to what degree. But today, Yisker is like any other day. Why? Because those who only had that relationship, to a large degree, that group has become very small. The relationship of Elokei Avosseinu only remains strong if it's Elokeinu, if it's my God. If I have a personal relationship with him. Matter of fact, we could suggest that most of the time, with Shemona Esrei, we say Elokeinu, my God, the God of my ancestors. The more I see God in my own life, the more I recognize God's presence in my life, the more I can recognize him in the presence in the lives of my ancestors. And the less we see God in our own lives, the less that we focus on God's involvement in our life, the less we see him in the life of our ancestors. And I think that to a large degree, this explains the trends in Jewish life in America today. And the same thing in the Shira. Till Kriyas Yamsuf, when Moshe came to speak to the Jewish people, he came and spoke how God, the God of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, has come to redeem them. But at Kriyas Yamsuf, the Jewish people said, Zekeli vanveyu. This is my God. Vanveyu, Targum Onkelos says, means I'll build for him a mikdash. Because the mikdash represents the personal relationship between God and the Jewish people. The marriage home. It's the perpetuation, as I always mention. The Ramban says the perpetuation of Sinai. The Mishkan was the vehicle to transfer Har Sinai to Yerushalayim, to connect Har Sinai with Yerushalayim. That was it represents the marriage home, the personal relationship. So, and there it was Sekeli Vanveyu Elokei Aviv Aramimenu, the God of my fathers, and I will serve him. As the way Targum Onkelos or exalt him. But Zekeli Vanveyu, Targum Onkelos says, I'll build for him a mikdash. Because in the personal relationship, it's a love relationship. It's the marriage home between God and the Jewish people. But in every marriage, you can't be just married in the home. You have to be married outside the home also. So, and that's why at the end of the Shira, we say we're going to build, because now I see the personal relationship. I see the special need for a Beis HaMikdash, which represents that personal relationship. Okay, now, I think to a certain degree, so we could suggest that this was this was what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying to tell the Jewish people. It's not that the Jewish people didn't want a relationship with God. They wanted a relationship with God, but they wanted a limited relationship. It wasn't the true marriage relationship. The house, the home, is the symbol of a relationship, but that relationship is outside the home. The problem with the Jews at the time of the Churban is that they had a fraudulent marriage relationship. They wanted a relationship. It was the relationship of the God of their ancestors. And like many people who come to visit their ancestors on Father's Day and on Mother's Day, they would come from time to time to the Beis HaMikdash. But when they left God in the Beis HaMikdash. He wasn't part of their life. He wasn't part of their life. We restrict God. We restrict God to the Beis HaMikdash, to the shul, to the Beis Medrash. But we don't have God everywhere, wherever we go. Those are not my religious moments. The Rambam in Perek Yud of Hilchos Tshuva, when he talks about Avas Hashem, he says Avas Hashem, love of God, the personal relationship is like the relationship a man has for a woman, meaning a marriage relationship, that all his thoughts, wherever he is, whenever he is about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't make the walls of your home a prison for your spouse in terms of the relationship. The Jewish people used the Beis HaMikdash. They wanted a relationship with God, but they didn't want a full marriage relationship. They wanted the symbol of the marriage relationship. In a sense, the Beis HaMikdash became God's prison, and God broke the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. About the Shnei Kruvim, as I'll say, that if Pneihem Ishal Abayis, if they faced the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, that was a symbol, Eino Sin Ritzono Shel Makom. If the Beis HaMikdash is used only as an official relationship, but it's not a real relationship, the walls of the Beis HaMikdash are made to limit the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Then it's Enos in Ritzono Shel Makom. Look at the things that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed for. Many things are listed. Sinas Chinam, Avodah Zarah, Gil Arayis, Shvichas Damim. Wasn't so much what happened in the Beis HaMikdash. It's what happened outside the Beis HaMikdash. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted the Jewish people to understand that what was their problem? Their problem was they wanted a relationship with God, but it was a relationship based on the perception of God, the life of their parents and their teacher, but it wasn't the real marriage relationship. So that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu first says, Nachu Achmi. I'm sending figuratively, I'm sending the teachers, I'm sending the parents to give me nechama. But the Jewish people say, God doesn't want a relationship with me. So God says, no, you broke the relationship. Anochi hu menachemchem. I'm the one who's menachem you. And this is the week of Elul. What's the week of Elul? Ani ledodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Pasuk in Shir Shirim. It talks about the love relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. And this is this is what Elul is. Elul, it's the first 3 weeks we read about how the just having the relationship of Elokei Avosenu, or the relationships that's through a Navi. Of course, a Navi is very important. But the Navi, when he comes back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the teachers, when they have to realize that the goal is not to limit the relationship through them. Yes, the relationship with them is very important. But each person needs to develop his own personal relationship, his love relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. And that's what Yaakov Avinu said. So long as I was in the tent of my father Yitzchak. Yitzchak spiritually dominated the scene. But now that I'm forced to leave, I'm going to use the situation to strengthen my personal relationship with God. V'haya Hashem li le'elokim. God will be. I'm going to strengthen my personal relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are all offered opportunities, not just to strengthen the relationship. Of course, it's important to strengthen the relationship of Elokei Avoseinu, but it has to be done by strengthening your personal relationship as well. That's the V'haya Hashem li le'elokim. God will be a God for me. Now, in terms of Elul, I just want to mention a thought. Part of this thought is my father's. I'll mention what part is my father's. My father once was discussing what's the significance of shofar blowing. What's the significance of shofar blowing? And my father said in Elul, he said, mentioned the story. My uncle also mentioned the story that my grandfather was always the makri when someone would blow shofar, he would kia. And this was, I think, in Chaslavich. My grandfather was the Rabbi in Chaslavich. And the one blowing the shofar was crying, bitter tears. I think my uncle based it on something in the Likutei Torah, that the neshama on Rosh Hashanah cries because it wants to join its source, whatever it is. And my grandfather was scared that the crying, the emotions, are going to affect the way the tkiyas will be produced, and they won't be done properly, not in conformity to the shitos that were necessary. And he turned to the Baal Tokeya, to the one blowing the shofar, and he said to him, Why are you crying? It's a shofar! And so my grandfather said to him, mitzvah of shofar. My grandfather said to him, do you cry when you eat matzah on Pesach? He said, no, I'm very happy when I eat matzah. So my grandfather said to him, you should be happy here also. Be happy when you blow shofar. Actually, there's a Tshuvas Harashba. The Tshuvas Harashba says, the reason we make Shechiyanu by shofar is because when we hear the shofar, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to forgive us. We're going to have kapara. So I assume that's where my grandfather got it from. So the person, he was a lamdan, the one who blew the shofar. He said, but the Rambam in Perek Gimel of Hilchos Tshuva, he says, even though shofar is a mitzvah, remez yesh b'davar, there is a message, an indication of a message. Uri yesheni mitir maschem, wake up out of your lethargy, your spiritual lethargy. It's a spiritual alarm clock. In Rosh Hashanah, I always say, is based on the experience of Matan Torah. The blowing of the shofar is the experience that was at Har Sinai also. And there's an interesting medrash. The medrash says that the night of Matan Torah, we're doing tshuva, and we have to re-undergo the experience. And shofar is the experience, Rosh Hashanah is the experience of Sinai, with the shofar blowing. Yom Kippur is the re-acceptance of the mitzvahs of Sinai with the vidui. That's the Nasa v'nishma. So, and it's interesting, the Medrash says, the Zohar, I think a Medrash also, very famous, that the night before Matan Torah, God made a very pleasant weather, climate, people were able to sleep. But then in the morning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu came, took all the mosquitoes out of the air. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to give them the Torah. They were all sleeping. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Lama basi veinish, karasi veinona. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to wake them up. Some say that's the reason there's a minhag Shavuos night, to stay up all night as a tikkun for what they did in the original Shavuos night. But in any case, so what is tshuva? Tshuva is reacceptance of the Torah, reacceptance of Sinai, undergoing the experience of Sinai as demonstrated by Rosh Hashanah, and reaccepting the mitzvahs of Sinai as demonstrated by the vidui of Yom Kippurim. So in a sense, perhaps that's the remez yesh b'davar that the Rambam is talking about. Wake up. What does it mean, wake up? I think, how is it that the Jews came 40 days after saying Naaseh v'Nishma? How is it that they came to build a golden calf? But the answer is the Jewish people, so long as Moshe was with them, the experience of Har Sinai continued. But once Moshe left, they no longer had the experience of Har Sinai. When you don't have the experience of Har Sinai, then it's easy to sin. What is the experience of Har Sinai? The experience of Har Sinai, that's the sound of the shofar. What is the sound of the shofar? The sound of the shofar. Uvikol shofar hafata. God made his presence known to the Jewish people. The vidui, not Yom Kippur, but the vidui we always say, or we should say, when we realize we sin, Ana Hashem chatasi yavisi, pashati lefanecha. I tricked myself. That's how I came to sin. I didn't realize you were there. If we have God always there, if we see God always there, if we recognize the presence of God wherever we are, we don't come to sin. The idea of the shofar is recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's there. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's always there. But when you're asleep, you don't become sensitive to things that are there. The idea of the shofar is wake up from your spiritual lethargy. You're sitting there. You're there where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. So this is what I think is the explanation. But my father suggested something. My father said that, of course, the Baal Shofar. So my grandfather answered. He says, yes, the Rambam does mention it, but the Rambam says that he mentions in Hilchos Tshuva. He doesn't mention Hilchos Shofar. It's not. What's the idea? The idea is the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam Moreh Nevuchim gives Tamei mitzvahs, but the Tamei mitzvahs are not part of the mitzvah. As a matter of fact, the Rambam says explicitly in Moreh Nevuchim, let's say that he gives Tamim based on the Pshuta Dekra, on the way mitzvahs are mentioned, halachas are mentioned literally in the Torah, even though the Torah Shabbat Peh says that that's not the way it's practiced. Why? Because the Rambam Shita is, let's say, he says, ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye. And the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim, because a person who puts another person's eye out deserves to have his eye put out. And then the Rambam says, you'll ask me a question that no one, that you'll ask a question. Chazal tell us, ayin tachas ayin means mammon, means money. You have to pay him. He says the purpose of this chibur, the purpose of the Moreh Nevuchim, is to explain the Torah Shebechsav. That means that there is a meaning in the Torah Shebechsav. even though the halacha is not based on Torah Sheba'al Peh. How is that possible? Rambam Chas v'Shalom wasn't an apikoros, didn't reject Torah Sheba'al Peh. But the answer is, when we focus on Tamei mitzvahs, we don't focus on Tamei mitzvahs when we perform the mitzvah. It's only when we study about the mitzvah. It's part of the mitzvah of tshuva to understand the mitzvah of shofar. But when we blow the shofar, we submit to the will of God. With Ashek the Shem themselves, it's Ivano Lishmoa Kol Shofar. But the mitzvah of shofar makes us, the mitzvah of tshuva makes us required to understand the mitzvah of shofar, to understand the message, the remez yesh b'davar. It's when we learn about the mitzvahs, when we learn about the halachas, we have to learn certain traits to let them affect our personality, Even if the halacha, it's different. The Rambam says, Bas v'cholav, it's based on the practices of the Umos Olam, the nations of the world, when they had their celebrations of their holidays. Because they always would take a kid goat, and cook it in milk. Bas v'cholav, milk and meat, has nothing to do with that in our lives. But when we learn about Bas v'cholav, we have to learn that when we celebrate our holidays, we have our way of celebrating holidays. We don't imitate the ways of the Umos Olam. Certainly not part of the halacha Bas v'cholav, but it's the tam of the mitzvah Bas v'cholav. When we study the psukim, there is a meaning, there is a message in the psukim themselves. Even though the halacha emphasizes a different point, but that has to become part of our personality. We have to be, the Torah is giving us messages to affect our personality. And so my father said that this is the way I understand what my grandfather said. My father said that Elul is, when we do the mitzvah, it's only l'shem mitzvah, for the mitzvah of shofar. But Elul, we blow the shofar for the tam ha-mitzvah. Uri yesheni mitir maskan, but I think it's more than that. We call shofar hafata, God makes his presence known with the sound of the shofar. Now, when the shofar, Rosh Hashanah, we blow the shofar 30 kolos before Musaf, we blow during Musaf, and the custom we have is to blow 40 kolos at the end of davening, before we leave the shul. As a matter of fact, the sheet of the Baal Amor is that Rosh Hashanah, the last 40 kolos are very important. It's not just a minhag. Our custom is that it's just a minhag. But the Baal Amor says the kiyos, the mu'umad, which the Gemara calls the kiyos of Yushav, the sitting kiyos, and the kiyos of mu'umad, is when you get up to leave the shul. He said the first 30 kolos, that was something that happened much later, in the time of the Gonim. The first kolos were the kolos that in the Shemon Esrei, and the last kolos was when people got up to leave the shul. Why? Okay, to confuse the Satan, but the Satan who are Yetzirah. What's the idea? Kol shofar hafata, you have to sense the presence of God. You have to perpetuate the experience of Matan Torah, not just the mitzvahs of Matan Torah. But you can't perpetuate just in the shul. You have to perpetuate it when you go out of the shul as well. It's easy, not that everybody does it, but it's easy to sense the presence of God when you're in shul at Rosh Hashanah. But you got to blow shofar also, according to the Balmor, before you go out of shul. And our minhag is to blow shofar then also. And perhaps the minhag is based on this. The mitzvah of shofar is outside. And I think that's the idea. That's the idea of Elul. Lubavitch will see this. They say Melech Basodeh. In other words, Rosh Hashanah, the Seres Yemei Tshuva, God is there. Dirshu Hashem B'matzo. It's easy to sense His presence, but we have to sense the. It's not enough to sense the presence of God inside the shul. We can't make the mistake that the Jews did at the time of the Korban. We have to realize we have to sense the presence of God wherever we are. The Beis HaMikdash, the shul, that's a symbol of our relationship. But a marriage relationship, a love relationship, that has to be everywhere. So I think that this is now. But when we recognize God, Rosh Hashanah, we recognize God not just in when we recognize for God Rosh Hashanah, we recognize His King, Malchus. My uncle mentions that in Chaslavich they used to call Rosh Hashanah coronation night. We make God king. God is ruler, but we make God king. Rosh Hashanah, we make God king. But it's important that God not just be king in His palace, in the Beis HaMikdash, in the shul, in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, in that Seres Yemei Tshuva, but we have to make God king. We have to make God king outside the shul also. We have to understand the sound of the shofar is to sense the presence of God, not just to sense the presence of God when you're in the Beis HaMikdash. That was the problem. That's why there was a Churban. So the idea of Elul is that personal relationship, the relationship that we have everywhere, like a husband and wife relationship should be. That all thoughts focus on Him. Wherever you are, you sense His presence. You don't get tired to His presence. You don't act like a person sleeping or daydreaming. You have to wake up. You have to wake up and sense the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, every morning and evening, we say Shema. What is Shema? Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. So acceptance of the yoke of heaven is identified with morning and evening in order for us to understand what shofar is, what it really means, the lesson of shofar. So some had a custom to blow the shofar in Elul in times of accepting of Malchus Shemayim. But just before you leave the shul, to emphasize the point that we have to sense the presence of God as our Melech, as our King, and as King of the world, wherever we'll be, not just in shul, but wherever we'll be. That's why I think there's a shita that in Elul. That's why I think there's a shita that in Elul we blow the shofar, both morning and evening, by Shachris and by Ma'ariv as well, and this is the and so it's all preparation for the Seres Yemei Tshuva, but this represents the personal relationship of Elul. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I'm to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. It's the personal relationship that each Jew has with God, and that relationship is not limited to the shul. It's not limited to the Beis HaMikdash, and this is our nechama. Our nechama is that the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, and it will be rebuilt as a symbol of a relation that we will constantly have. B'mehera b'yameinu. Okay. Okay. Leave it there.